All right.
Are you good?
Yeah, you can start.
So hello, my name is Ella. My topic of choice is RX Singularity, how artificial intelligence is being used in the pharmaceutical industry. So in this presentation, I have kind of four main topics of interest. And so firstly, I'll be going through a brief history of pharmaceuticals. I think looking back on history, seeing how far we've come and what kind of technologies emerged to get us where we are is really fascinating and really important. Followed by how are drugs designed and developed today? How is artificial intelligence being used in the pharmaceutical industry? What are the pros, what are the cons? And lastly, what to expect in the future and where do we go from here? So we're going to take it all the way back to the Middle Ages and Renaissance period. And during this time, apothecaries were very popular. Apothecaries were guilds of healers and herbal botanists and wise women who would create these herbal and botanical remedies. And actually in the Middle Ages, storefront dispensaries were heavily popularized, and these were actually the first forms of pharmacy. During this time, Socrates, a Greek physician, wrote De Materia Medica, which is a pharmacopoeia consisting of herbal and botanical medicinal substances. However, he did not become famous until the scientific revolution, and this is thanks to the printing press. The printing press allowed pharmaceutical education and knowledge to be spread all across Europe. And this spreading of knowledge influenced the great thinkers of this time to move away from herbal remedies and kind of start to look at the chemical remedies. Now we're going to jump ahead a little bit to Industrial Revolution. So when I was researching this topic, many authors, many writers argue that there actually have been 4 industrial revolutions. And now with artificial intelligence, we are currently in the 4th revolution. But I'm going to focus right now a little bit on the first one, which was from 1800s to the early 1900s. And we shifted from manual manufacturing to machinery. And this shift allowed us to look more in detail at the chemical remedies and chemical substances. And this really allowed us to flourish in terms of pharmaceutical industry and research. So now we're going to move on to the American modern period. And Eric and Meigs coined 4 eras. The soda fountain era from 1920 to 1949, the lick, stick, pour, and more era from 1950 to 1979, the pharmaceutical care era from 1980 to 2009, and the post-pharmaceutical care era from 2010 to the present. So the soda fountain era. So in 1919, prohibition began, and the selling and manufacturing of alcohol was illegal. And with this came the closing of bars, and people needed a new place to socialize in the community. And pharmacies actually became that place of socialization. In fact, pharmacists actually started selling medicinal alcohol. As you can see in this corner here, there is a bottle of whiskey, and its directions are 1 glass full 3 times daily. So you may be fixed of your ailment, but you might also be intoxicated. And during this time, people also needed a replacement for alcohol, and that was soda. And hence the name of the era. Soda fountains were actually invented and implemented into pharmacies at this time. So pharmacists actually shifted away from patient care and non-dispensing services and focusing more on kind of selling consumer goods, in a sense. We also see an increase in pharmaceutical education. At this time, 20 American pharmaceutical institutions adopted a 4-year degree standard, where aspiring pharmacists would learn chemistry, physiology, pharmacology, and even business operations. Also during this time, the patient and physician dynamic was heavily secure and protected. And patients could not discuss with pharmacists about their prescriptions or ask them any questions. Pharmacists didn't learn about diagnosis, they didn't learn about treatments, and they even referred to patients as customers. So there was a huge debate about whether they were a sales associate, businessman, or a healthcare provider. And we see this debate moving into later eras. So the lick, stick, pour, and more era. So we kind of start to see a little bit of this recognition that pharmacists are healthcare providers. They start to refer to their customers as patients, and we see the removal of soda fountains from pharmacies, and they start to focus a little bit more on patient care. However, the patient and physician dynamic is still heavily protected. Pill bottles during this time did not have the name of the drug on them to ensure that they could not discuss their prescription. We also see the implementation of computers in this era. And this is really important because it actually was able to highlight any drug-drug interactions of patients and keep track of familial pharmaceutical records. We see also a further increase in pharmaceutical education. So we go from a 4-year degree standard to a 5-year degree standard. And we also see a bit of an increase in research with that increase in education. The pharmaceutical care era. So once again, we see more recognition that pharmacists are a healthcare provider. And this is mainly thanks to immunizations being allowed in pharmacies. And the fact that pharmacists were able to provide vaccinations was one of the major fighting roles, I guess you could say, of the H1N1 pandemic in 2009. And not only can they provide immunizations at this time, they were also able to provide healthcare screenings and smoking cessation and really focus on patient care. We see a shift again from a 5-year degree standard to finally a 6-year degree standard and a doctorate of pharmacy. Now the post-pharmaceutical care era. This is kind of where we are at right now. You can now discuss with your pharmacist any questions about your prescription. So you can see private consultation, ask your pharmacist, and pharmacists are now a key healthcare provider within the community. We still have the doctorate of pharmacy, but we're also seeing an increase of aspiring pharmacists taking up residencies in community pharmacies to increase research opportunities and increase job opportunities and training. And we actually might see that increase in the future, more and more aspiring pharmacists taking on residencies. So how are drugs discovered and developed today? So there are 4 steps of drug development: basic research, the preclinical phase, the clinical phase, and the post-marketing phase. So during the basic research phase, researchers, due to new technology, new ways to use an old drug, new diseases, are going to look at a data set of biochemical compounds to find a drug candidate. And once they find this drug candidate, they can then go through the pharmacokinetics, so what the body does to the drug, or the pharmacodynamics, what the drug does to the body, to determine dosage, beneficial effects, adverse effects, toxicity, and so on. And once they find a concrete drug candidate and determine that it is relatively safe for human consumption, they can then move on to the preclinical phase. And in this phase, they can kind of take 2 directions here. They can go the in vitro route, so in glass, so looking at test tubes and plates for, again, determining dosage, toxicity, adverse effects, or in vivo route, in life, looking at model organisms and, again, determining dosage, toxicity, and so on. Once they determine, again, that it's now safe for human consumption, They move on to the clinical phase, and in the clinical phase, there's actually 4 subsets of phases. And during each phase, we see an increase in participants and an increase in duration, again to determine toxicity, dosage, adverse effects, and so on. And once researchers have data from 2 large controlled trials, they can then apply for marketing. And when they are approved for marketing, they can only advertise the approved use. They also have to advertise the adverse effects and any prescribing information. And when it's actually approved, it is patented. And once this patent expires, then other companies can actually use the exact same formulation, but sell it as the generic brand. So of course, there are problems with today's methods. So the first issue is that it's actually very, very expensive to develop a drug. In 2019, it was estimated that it costs $3 billion to develop a drug. It's also very time-consuming. It takes about 6 years for a drug to reach the final stage of the clinical phase and go to approval. It also has high failure rates. About 62% of drug candidates do not make it to the preclinical phase. We also know that very complex diseases have complex processes with lots of biochemical compounds interacting with each other, and that requires a drug to target multiple compounds and targets. And this is very challenging to design a drug for multiple targets, as it also requires large biological and chemical data sets that one human researcher cannot sift through. Again, it's expensive, it's time-consuming, and it's very, very complex. Some key compounds may even be completely overlooked. So how is artificial intelligence used to combat these problems? So there are a variety of ways that AI is being used. As we learned in this course, machine learning is the ability of a computer to learn without programming, and machine learning has actually been adopted to analyze these large biological and chemical data sets and pinpoint any compounds that a researcher might have once completely overlooked. It can also look at old drugs and repurpose them for new uses and new ways of fighting a disease. And in turn, this completely speeds up the candidate process and increases the success rate of a candidate drug to go to the preclinical phase. We also learned in this course that deep learning is the use of neural networks to learn large data sets. And deep learning has actually been used to identify drug targets and predict what kind of protein that drug needs to bind to. I'll get into that a bit later. It can also look at toxicity and determine whether the drug is highly toxic so that researchers can actually prioritize low toxic profiles of drugs. And again, increasing candidate screening and increasing the preclinical phase. AI has also been used in gene therapy, developing gene editing techniques, and in personalized medicine. So I'll get into those guys a little bit here in this segment. So, drug targets. So, one of the key mechanisms of drugs is that they bind to proteins. And for many, many years, it's been very difficult to visualize what a protein looks like, how it folds, its structure and everything. And AlphaFold, Google's DeepMind's AlphaFold, has actually been able to predict the protein structures and how they fold. And they can predict protein structures of diseases that we had no idea how they worked. And this is very important because now we can actually develop treatments for once believed incurable diseases, now that we can visualize what that protein looks like. However, there's been quite a lot of discourse about this in terms of accuracy. Yes, it can predict that protein structure, but how accurate is it at predicting that protein structure? It can't really predict ligand binding interactions and how that drug is going to bind to that protein. But there have been a few AI tools that have come into play here to fix these problems. For example, Matchmaker is an AI tool that's been able to actually predict how protein and ligands interact, as you can see here. Dragonfold is another AI tool that I think is really, really cool. They also been able to predict how proteins and ligands interact, but they can actually also predict how drugs change the configuration and the folding of that protein, as that's another marker of drugs, is that they can actually change the shape of the protein. So that, I think, is actually a really, really cool tool. Next is personalized treatments. So different people have different metabolisms, and how they respond to a drug and deal with the drug in their body varies from person to person. And this is all based on genetic profiles and medical history. And again, it takes a lot of data to determine a treatment based on their genetic profiles, based on their metabolism. And this is where the AI tool Curate AI comes into play. They can actually determine the dosage and treatment of an individual based on genetic information being inputted into that AI tool. What's even cooler is that they can actually predict the progression or recession of the disease and change the dosage of the drug or change the treatment plan of the individual to better deal with how their disease progresses or has, or if it's in recession. Gene and cell therapies. So again, gene cell therapies require large data sets, and this is where AI comes in to analyze these large data sets and improve phenotyping accuracy. So what this means is getting better desired results of genetic and cell therapies. And a key component of gene and cell therapies is that they must work after the first treatment, because they require the editing of a gene, of a disease, and that takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, so it must work after the first treatment. And AI has actually been used to design guide RNA to target specific CRISPR sites for gene editing, for cancer cells, to edit cancer cells and pathogens. And it has even been used actually to design cancer vaccines, so mRNA vaccines that target cancer cells. So there are so many biotech companies that have been popping up, and so many startups that have been trying to implement artificial intelligence into the pharmaceutical industry, whether that's to visualize specific atoms or to better personalize your treatment. So like all technologies, there's pros and cons. And one of the pros is that it cuts costs of drug development. We get rid of many resources and a lot of time that is required for drug development. And we can even speed up certain phases of the drug development process, such as the candidate screening process. It also improves efficiency of clinical trials. So it's actually able to sift through the data of clinical trials and look at any potential adverse effects, predict how that population is going to react to that drug, and more efficiently look and analyze at clinical trial data. It also improves the accessibility and affordability of healthcare. So it can actually analyze large populations to predict what kind of treatment that population needs. Personalized treatments, again, can tailor your treatment, and one disease may look completely different in another person. So personalizing that treatment to your genetic profile and your medical history. And lastly, we have seen some novel drugs being found and made. They have not reached the market just yet, but they are starting to show up. For an example, Halocin is an antibiotic that has actually been found using AI, and it has been shown to kill E. coli and many antibiotic-resistant bacteria such as Mycobacter tuberculosis. Some of the cons of AI. So, as I've been saying, AI in the pharmaceutical industry requires lots and lots and lots of data. And we are not at a point right now where we have that much data or data of very high quality. So at this point in time, there is concern of the fact that we have insufficient data and how that is going to skew the results of AI. And with that comes some ethical concerns, bias and inequality. And if we give an AI tool unbiased and unrepresentative data, how is that going to skew the results? We've seen it with self-driving cars being given a mainly white data set and not being able to detect black pedestrians. So there is this huge issue of what kind of data is the AI tool being given. And when I was researching this, it kind of brought up, or made me remember this current issue actually, the opioid epidemic and the Purdue-Sackler involvement in the opioid epidemic. Purdue in the 1990s brought to market Oxycontin, which is a very, very, very addictive opioid. And in their research phases, they noticed how addictive this drug was. However, they still brought it to market, regardless of this information, and even advertised it as the less addictive opioid. And throughout its time on the market, they were being given information about how addictive this drug actually was, how there was so many people dying from prescribed opioid overdose, and even people stealing from pharmacies Oxycontin, whether to sell it themselves or to use it themselves. They even went so far as to giving financial compensation to doctors who prescribed the drug. And in, I believe, just last year, they spent $9 billion in settlements to victims' families. So there comes this concern of, okay, what if a pharmaceutical company like Purdue was to give an AI tool data that skews the results in their favor? What if we get another opioid epidemic? Another issue is privacy and security of sensitive information. So again, with large data sets, there may be some medical information, private information that may be misused. It may be leaked to insurance companies, and it can affect how they are covered by that insurance. And of course, with any conversation about AI is the conversation about job loss and AI replacing valuable jobs in the pharmaceutical industry. But in my opinion, as we've learned through this course, AI will not replace a doctor, but a doctor who knows how to use AI will. And I think that we need to use AI as a tool rather than as a replacement. And I think we still need human intervention in the pharmaceutical industry to ensure and to verify any results that an AI tool may produce. So where do we go from here? So I think over time, we will see more and more large pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca, like Pfizer, like Merck, incorporate artificial intelligence into their drug process. I even think large pharmaceutical companies will be birthed out of artificial intelligence. Maybe first, artificial intelligence will be incorporated into the front lines of the pharmaceutical industry and into pharmacies. In October 2024, actually, Amazon came up with a new business venture called Amazon Pharmacy. And they will be implementing AI in this new business model, this new business venture, to fill out prescriptions faster, to predict when you're going to run out of that prescription, or to predict when they need to stock up on a certain drug. I don't know how many times I've been to my pharmacy and I've had to wait like a week because they were out of my prescription. They're also able to keep track again of drug-drug interactions and pharmaceutical records. Maybe artificial intelligence will become so advanced that we can create an artificial human that is biochemically complex, physiologically complex, like a real human, and test drug candidates on this artificial human, and perhaps even completely cutting out the need for a clinical phase and a preclinical phase. Or maybe we'll see more silent implementations of artificial intelligence in the pharmaceutical industry. Maybe we'll see researchers using smartwatches to better collect clinical data and analyze clinical data more efficiently. And during my research, I came across a Vox article that interviewed a biotech CEO, Chris Gibson, and he quoted a Henry Ford quote that I think is just perfect for where we are currently in artificial intelligence. And the quote is, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it's black." So artificial intelligence in the pharmaceutical industry has so many avenues, so many uses. We just don't know how. We don't know how to use it. We don't know how it works for one, and the possibilities are endless. But right now, we can only have it in one color. So that is my presentation. And if you have any questions, I would love to hear them.
So I think an important lesson from this course is that in the future, there'll be things that AI discovers in science that were not part of a kind of human design process. People thinking, well, we're going to discover a new drug and so on. So there's sort of an accidental outcome of the fact that AI is becoming a lot smarter than we are, right? So I think one of the things maybe to take away from the course is that an important skill, which is not worth anything today, but will be worth billions in the future, is for you to be a person who can figure out which ideas coming out from AI are actually practical, actionable, things that we should pursue, even if we don't understand where they came from or why AI is, suggesting the use of this stuff. So that humans won't really be in charge at a certain point, but they still have decisions to make, And so if you can conceive of a world as we enter it like that, then you can provide much more benefit to your fellow humans than if you're just assuming that even though AI is way smarter than we are, we're still in charge of everything. Like we get AI to help us, but we're still in charge. And as long as you have that mindset, you're going to miss all the big things that AI is going to discover independent of us, or sort of off to the side or in an unexpected place, right? But if you remember today and kind of are thinking of that 10, 20 years, then maybe you'll be able to have that skill and provide that benefit, to kind of be an AI whisperer, right? To have enough feeling for AI, to know even when something is suggested we can't possibly understand, which one of those things is worth pursuing, right? And so in that sense, having all the cars black is the same as always thinking, okay, whatever we do in the future, humans must always be in charge, and sure, AI is going to be more and more helpful as time goes on, but still we need to sort of decide where that's not going to be how it works, you know. So we still need to function and make the humanity around us function and be successful in a world where that dynamic is completely flipped and where AI is sort of running things, but we still have freedom, you know? That may sound great that we still have freedom, but if we don't have a clue what to do with the freedom, it isn't going to be a very good world. Yeah. So, okay, so I think we should go on then to the